I am the outlaw, Robin Hood.
Greetings and salutations, guys. I'm here with my review of The Death of Robin Hood. This is a new film starring Hugh Jackman in the title role, and it is the newest film from writer-director Michael Sarnoski, who previously brought us the Nicolas Cage movie Pig and A Quiet Place Day One. Jackman stars here as a decidedly old and grizzled version of Robin Hood in a movie that's really a deconstruction because it's about how this version of Robin Hood was not a good guy at all, and that everything that they said about him, stealing from the rich to give to the poor, and that, he was actually helping people, that was all a lie, that was all stories that maybe he helped spread, but also just got picked up along the way, that really he was just a criminal and someone who, as he says in the movie, he killed and he stole because he enjoyed it. But now he is an old man. Now he knows that the end of his life is nearing, and he certainly is living with regret and sadness and sort of loneliness because Maid Marian is nowhere to be found in this version. She never even existed in this version. His past does catch up to him at the beginning of the movie, as he is recruited by a familiar face from his past in the form of Little John, played by Bill Skarsgård. But one thing I really appreciate about The Death of Robin Hood is it does not play out in the way you think it would, in the way that you would expect a story like this to happen, which is to say, yes, it does begin with him going on what could be seen as one last adventure, adventure very much being in air quotes because of the kind of guy this Robin Hood is, but that the movie does not stay on that path. That most of this movie is about a injured Robin Hood being brought into the care of a nun, Sister Bridget, played by Jodie Comer, and him now being sort of stuck in this quiet, contemplative place where he is going to have to look at who he is, look at the life he's led, and come to terms with it the best that he can. At this point, I'm very much on board for anything Michael Sarnoski does. I thought Pig was great. I thought A Quiet Place Day One was excellent. My favorite of that series, and I like the other two movies. His movies are very introspective and emotional, but they can also be very exciting when they need to be. Quiet Place Day One especially, I think, delivered everything you wanted as far as the thrills of a movie with that title, yet also really packed a punch, when it came to the emotional core of its main characters. So him doing this story, him doing a story about an older Robin Hood who was not a good guy looking back at his life, I mean, it makes sense, and I can see what drew him to it. I don't think this movie is as strong as his first two. It's still a good movie, but it's also a little belabored, and I know that's partly by design because it is supposed to be mostly a quiet and somber piece. And there's certainly nothing wrong with a deliberately paced movie taking its time, but there are some places where I do think the pacing here does get a little too drawn out. Where some shots go on a little too long, especially maybe in sort of the middle of the movie heading towards its ending. That being said, there's some really strong points to this movie, and the way it's structured is really interesting. And I do love that he delivers some great set pieces in the first act of the movie. He does give you sort of, here's that old man Robin Hood going back into action one more time thing. It's just done, first of all, in an extremely brutal way, because that's the tone of this movie, the tone of this Robin Hood. So things that happen are, especially sort of gnarly, nasty. And the fact that it all happens in the first third, that like what might be the action climax of a different version of this story is instead something that happens early on. And now we're going to deal with the aftermath for most of the rest of the film. I think Hugh Jackman is great here. Look, there's no escaping that you will think of Logan watching this movie. Of course you will. I know they're well aware of that. They've talked about doing press because, once again, he's playing a guy, a legendary character who is in the end of his life and is having to deal with all this stuff, all of the pain of his past. They even give him, and I think this was a bold move, they give him a little girl as sort of a surrogate daughter figure who comes in the story. But it does not feel like a carbon copy. It doesn't feel like Hugh Jackman is doing the same thing again because the characters are different. And there is a distinct difference to Wolverine as a guy who has a past of violence and a past of regret, but is still a hero ultimately. And this Robin Hood, who's not, and does things at the beginning of this movie, has an old man. We see him do things nonchalantly, easily, that are pretty damn brutal, and something that, we would not forgive a real great hero in another film if they did this. So I do think that they feel distinct. You know, it doesn't feel like, okay, I've seen Hugh Jackman do this exact same thing before. You've seen him do a version of it before, but guess what? He does it really well. There is something about that contemplation that he can play, and that he can play a guy who does sort of have these years and his thinking back on it all. And it does, he's able to put so much behind his eyes of the weight of all of that. And he does it very well here once again. Jodie Comer is dependably strong, playing Sister Bridget. I do wish we got a little more to her character as far as like a little more nuance and maybe a little bit more information about her, but she still manages to convey a lot. And the little bit we do get of her backstory packs a punch just the way it needs to. It is a small cast overall, but they're all great. Bill Skarsgård, who's kind of unrecognizable, though he often is very good as Little John. I also really liked Murray Bartlett. Never see his face. He is bandaged up, playing a leper that's also been taken in by Sister Bridget. Noah Jupe, who is from the Quiet Place movies, just not the one that Sarnoski directed, is great in a small role. And then a really nice performance from young Faith Delaney, who plays the little girl that Robin ends up caring for to the best of his abilities. And yes, this Robin Hood does use a bow and arrow. That's one part of the legend that is true, and he does end up teaching her how to use it a little bit. It's kind of the one time the movie lets itself fall a little bit more into sort of a cliche of an older hero type of character, even though again not a hero for the most part here, certainly. But I do think that indulgence works really well and gives a nice little sweet touch in the middle of this pretty grim story. Like I said, I was definitely into the death of Robin Hood for much of its runtime, and then it started to lose me a bit because things did start to drag on as we stayed longer and longer with him sort of walking around this beautiful outdoor area, and a lot of introspection and thinking, and these long shots that are quite lovely, but it did feel like maybe we're running in circles a little bit. But then the movie really sticks the landing, and not to give any spoilers, but they have a title they need to live up to, and that also puts a lot of onus on how this movie is going to end and what sort of weight it will have. And I think it ends on a really strong note. It is very emotional. You do feel the weight of what's happening here. You do feel the journey you've gone through with this character and everything he is thinking and feeling, and it's played very well by Hugh Jackman. And I did think it was sort of notable that just as the movie was starting to lose me a little bit, it got me back in such a big way. And when it cut to credits, I had really felt like I'd, gone through something with this. So, yeah, I definitely liked The Death of Robin Hood. Didn't love it as much as I wanted to. It would be my third favorite of Sarnoski's movies so far, but he's only made three movies and they're all really well done in their own way. And if this is a low point for him, it's not really a low point. It's just not quite as engaging, and maybe it could have been tightened up a little bit more compared to the other two. But I'm still very excited to see what he's doing next. I mean, I know what he's doing next. It's Death Stranding, which is going to be fascinating. But those are my thoughts on The Death of Robin Hood, which is in theaters this weekend. If you can like and subscribe, that would be great. Thanks a lot.